Welcome to another classical music podcast. My guest today is a very special person, Kate Northfield, as I knew her, who is now Kate Northfield Lanich, was my very first student at my very first university position. She is a wonderful violinist who has added, in the general parlance, many strings to her bow. Kate has gone on to be the personnel manager of the orchestras in Juilliard, and then on to the Aspen Music Festival, where she was director of operations, and has just been recently promoted to general manager. So I would like you to please welcome Kate Northfield Lanich, the general manager of the Aspen Music Festival. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Emil. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
It really is a pleasure for me as well. I am constantly preaching the doctrine of self invention and reinvention. So your life story is exhibit A for many of my students. I thought, since this broadcast is aimed at prospective students for the Kirov Academy, for their parents, for people in general who aren't quite sure what the professional side of the music industry is like, I thought that it would be best to begin with just giving you the floor to tell them a little bit about what your professional life is like, and has been like since graduation.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely taken some twists and turns, and this is not how I thought it was going to end up.
Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Totally. And I think being willing to kind of see some other possibilities, and also I talk a lot about this with my with our summer staff, because we have about 100 summer staff that come to help us put the festival on, and they're anywhere from 18 to 30 plus years old at various stages of their careers. But I think for a lot of us, it's that question of transferring and translating being a musician to the admin side, and it's very loaded. It can be very emotional to make that switch, and what does it mean, and how do you do that? And so happy to talk about that more too, but just to give kind of the rundown of how I got here. So I went to a small public liberal arts school in Maryland for college, went to St. Mary's College, and studied music and English, double major, and kind of wanted to try all the things while I was there. And violin was one of those things, but it definitely wasn't the only thing. And then upon graduating, I lived abroad for a little bit and did a performance certificate in Italy, and came home and decided, okay, I'm going to do it. Violin is it. Let's go. So I started studying with Emil's mom in New York, thanks to our mutual contact in Maryland, Vladimir Lande. And after taking the train up a bunch of times to see Emil's mom, she suggested...
By the way, let me just make a little parenthetical note here, for especially for those parents who, when choosing a teacher for their kids, base their choice on proximity, on how close the teacher lives. Kate's beyond dedication of taking a train up to New York and back, whatever it was, every 2 weeks, every
something
week.
Like that. Yeah.
That is extraordinary, but I've seen even more extraordinary commitment. There was a student I taught one summer at the Summit Music Festival who flew to Juilliard pre-college once every 10 days from Puerto Rico.
Man.
So when a parent objects to choosing teacher A because they live half an hour away and opts for teacher B because they live 10 minutes away,
That's right.
Just so you know, teachers are laughing.
Well, it was worth it. So I would do it all over again. And anyway, but she mentioned that she had a son who lived in DC, which I was living in Annapolis, and seemed like an easier commute. And you knew, might as well give it a try.
A little shorter, yeah.
That's right. So then we started working together, and then we both found Catholic University to be a great fit for you to be a teacher and for me to be a student. And that was when this all really started, kind of my foray into arts administration. I had dabbled when I was in college because I worked production for the River Concert Series. And so I was an intern there every summer. And that was really a catch-all position. I did bowings, I moved percussion equipment, I set up stands and lights, and I drove a...
You could describe the position as when stuff needed to be done beyond just playing?
Yeah, learning how to drive a 15-person passenger van loaded down with timpani, whatever needed to be done. It was one of those jobs. And then when I got to Catholic, I volunteered to be the orchestra manager. There had not been an orchestra manager. And there...
I loved your description of how you volunteered, that you realized, given the various sort of organizational issues, that your life would actually be easier
to do it
if things were organized by you than if you had to,
That's a classic type A response.
Yes, right.
I'll just do it.
I'll just do it.
I should have known then. So,
well, you kind of did know then about the whole, I like things neat.
Yeah, definitely. I felt helpful. And I felt useful, and I liked that feeling too. And I think I got to use my brain in different ways than just playing. And I liked being able to kind of stretch those ways, and also the people part of it I love, and being able to interact with all of the musicians and being their point person and kind of facilitating, being the grand facilitator is something that I really enjoy. So when I started at Catholic, I was the librarian and the orchestra manager, which is a combo that I don't highly recommend to others.
You should explain to viewers that how many librarians are there usually per orchestra manager?
One at least, right? Yeah.
There's one orchestra manager and a totally separate person tasked with being the librarian. Mm-hmm. But how many librarians does Aspen have?
6. Yeah. So it's a lot of work to do both, and you're using very different skills to do both. And librarian work is, now that my work at Catholic was nowhere to the expertise level that our Aspen librarians do it, or professional orchestra librarian. It was just kind of like, we got to make this work and get music on the stands, whatever it takes, kind of thing.
You've described that as, just basically solving problems. Okay. First trumpet does not have a part, we need to ensure that, or I happen to know that the principal trumpet is somewhat forgetful and may, leave their part at home by accident. I need to.
Yeah. And we were talking about that too. And I think any level of admin work, and that could be anything, like we had students that help with rehearsal setup, or, students that help us in the library with bowings, just any glimpse that you can get to the backstage world, I think just really informs your work as a player too, and vice versa. I think it really helps to kind of create that empathy that helps everything run smoothly, rather than feeling like, oh, stage manager, I don't really know that person or their name or what they do, or just hope that my stand is here.
How would you advise, again, students and the parents of prospective students to sort of stop and think about what it is that they don't see because it's behind the scenes?
Yeah. I mean, if there's any opportunity at any of your schools or rehearsals to lend a hand, and sometimes that can be in an official capacity, right? Like some schools do have a work study, like definitely in college, you've got work study opportunities to be a part of the music department in some way like that.
Not to mention it'll probably go much appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. But it is something that we even talk about with our students here in Aspen, because we've got the under 18 group that comes, as well as the college age group that comes. And if you're under 18 and you opt to play in orchestra, a lot of times you've played in a group where you haven't had an orchestra manager, and maybe you haven't had a stage manager. I mean, what do you even go to an orchestra manager with? What kind of problems are they there to help you address. So part of what we do in Aspen too is educating about the whole process of, this is what you talk to a stage manager about. This is what a librarian is here to help you with. This is what an orchestra manager is here to help you with, and kind of knowing who it all takes. But it's a learning process I didn't know when I was in high school for sure about all of these various roles and kind of what it all entails.
You found out by volunteering, by doing some of this work, you found out what other work needed to be done, what other work went into staging a performance.
Yeah. And, in the beginning, it was just to do it, but then kind of stumble upon, wow, I really enjoy this. And I think that happens to a lot of musicians. And we kind of see that here during the summer. They maybe are at a conservatory studying trombone and decide to come here for the summer to work as stage manager or whatever it is on our crew, and then kind of realize, wow, I think this is for me. And then it just takes off in a whole different direction. But what's great about it is you're still involved and you're still a part of it. And it's finding that balance of playing if you still want that. And I still play, and I still teach, and there's a way
I was going to ask about the teaching, whether there's actually time for that.
I think it depends on the position. When I was at Juilliard, I didn't have time to do it, but here there's time in the off season to take on a few students. And then in the summertime, we give them to students of our students here. So they get to have kind of that nice balance of having us in the off season, and then
they don't get ignored in the off season, and they don't get relegated to second or third place. When is the on season for Aspen specifically?
So our season starts in June and runs through August, and things start to really ramp up. As we round the holiday corner, and we start to enroll our students, but April and May, it starts to get pretty nuts around here.
Is it like a huge sigh of relief, the closing day in August, and then relaxation until December-ish?
So we do close for a week after the festival ends, and that's kind of for us to finally get maybe an 8-hour night of sleep again. and then we take September to really kind of post-mortem look at what went well, what didn't go well, and how can we use the off season to make that better. And then we go right into budget season. So that really informs our budget talks in October and November, but that's also when I build the master calendar. So that all happens in the fall so that we can start contracting our faculty and guest artists and all that stuff. So it feels very cyclical here, which is a little bit different than how it felt at Juilliard, which was very much prepare for the next concert. It was a shorter kind of workflow than it is here.
Yeah, Juilliard Orchestra, how many concerts per season, per year?
Well, so the way they do it is you have multiple orchestras rehearsing at one time. So you could have, conceivably a concert back to back to back, because they have enough students to have multiple orchestras going at once.
And then there was just the one of you tasked with putting out
with personnel. Yep. So I did the personnel side, and I had an apprentice as well. So that was a professional apprentice program, which was great. So it was kind of a chance for someone who maybe fresh out of college, interested in learning more, would work with me.
Even know what questions to ask, right?
Yeah, exactly. Would work with me to do all of the personnel and to keep track of the students and attendance and communication and all of that kind of stuff. So that was a neat program. And there's lots like that out there where you can kind of dip a toe in. I came to it, I feel like, from a much scrappier background, and kind of just figuring it out on the go.
Where there was no already existing sort of protocol for, how the whole preparation for a concert would go.
That's right. So at Catholic, it was just, okay, here's a problem, fix it.
This one problem, and then lay no groundwork necessarily for that same problem arising, down the road, right?
That's right. And, same with, there was another orchestra in DC that I managed around the same time too. And it was, I tell this to our summer staff too, is that there's pros and cons to both tracks. There's pros to getting that amazing professional apprenticeship at Juilliard and working with that staff and those students in that high level, and that having be your first experience. But I think there's also pros to kind of
baptism by fire.
Yeah, and having less resources as an organization, and having you be the one a little bit more responsible for those decisions. My apprentice at Juilliard, they're never going to be in the line of fire. That's not how the program's set up, So there's something that you really learn when you're the one that has to fix it.
Well, you were, I'm assuming, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. You were learning not just the job, but you were learning the possibility of delegating, which you may not have had, previously with the DC orchestras and the CUA orchestra. Having assistants and managing assistants is a skill all unto itself, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah. And vice, interacting with those conductors like I did at Catholic and at Apollo too, and kind of like really developing that close relationship and learning how to facilitate stuff for them, which you might not get in a bigger institution, of having that one-on-one interaction of what their perspective is and how they would like you to operate too, and like kind of what they're bringing to the table. And then you're translating that to whoever you're working with too. Right. So it's kind of understanding that flow. And when the flow is smaller, in a smaller organization, I feel like there's chances to really learn there.
Well, it's a more immediate kind of, initial to outcome connection, right?
Yeah,
there's a shorter feeding chain. When you were talking about, the job in Aspen versus in New York, in terms of, having more time at Aspen to teach, to play. When you were working in New York, that's when you were commuting between New York and DC also?
Yeah. Just whenever we tried to do every other week. So my husband still lived in DC. So a lot of times he was able to come up depending on kind of what part of the school year we were in. But yeah, it was a lot of train rides back and forth and working on rosters in the quiet car. And
I don't know if Mom ever told you this, but that whole period of your life with Wes is reminiscent, to me at least, of the tales my mom told me about her life with my father. Where she would be called upon to play concerts, let's say, in one end of the Soviet Union, and he would be posted to the other end. Where when he was conducting in Kishinev and she was being sent to, Siberia. The way to combine a personal life with a professional life under those circumstances is its own, I think, learning experience.
Yeah, for sure. And we had to learn it really fast,
Well, yes, that you should tell about that, about the timeline of your accepting the Juilliard job and what came right before.
That's right. Well, should I back up? So I guess I stopped off at Catholic, and then so I'll fill in that little break there. So then I really embraced the freelance life, and I was playing wherever I could and teaching wherever I could and managing Apollo, and I mean, I was all over the place. It was just, I was always in my car.
In that period, there was a lesson that you taught me, or at least reinforced for me, because you were doing a bit of contracting for orchestras around and about. And sometimes I would catch things, that were not meant for public consumption about why you would call a certain player or you wouldn't call a different player. And just this whole thing that I've tried to communicate to my students about, it's not nepotistic, it's not corrupt. It's just that people hire friends. People hire the people that they want to work with. And sometimes somebody who is exceptional at whatever they do, but very difficult to get along with, presents more problems than they solve.
Well, so I have a friend here, and she was also living the freelance life before she started here. And she used to say, and I've heard this too, that to be a great freelancer, you need three things. You need to, or two out of the three things, sorry. So you have to be on time, you have to be nice, or you have to be a great player. And as long as you have two out of the three, you're going to get called. And that might mean that the two out of the three are that you're on time and you're nice.
Yes. Something I had issues with in college.
That's true. So, I mean, there's really something to be said for that, but it translates to everything, you know, and any work that you want to do. And it's not just playing, but if you're not easy to work with and you don't respond to emails in a timely fashion and you can't be dependent on, then people are going to call you a couple times if you're great. And then after a while, they're just going to say, you know what, this other person, they're here whenever I call, and time is short. We're going to go with that. And
we've talked about this also with some of the guests, you know, from the orchestra world, the performers in orchestras, about the period after someone has won an orchestral audition, and between then and the time that they get tenure in the orchestra, where they are trying out the orchestra and the orchestra is trying them out for what can you do besides play well. You know, are you the sort of person that your stand partner wants to be sitting on the same stand with for the next 20, 30 years? You know, or is your presence a depressant in some way?
I mean, that's huge. And I think that's more than the friend call, right? Rather than calling your friends, it's kind of calling like, is this person going to be a person that is reliable and I can depend on them and that they're going to get along well with others? I mean, it's classic kindergarten rules to play by. Yeah, definitely. And it counts for so much. And it's also part of the whole networking question too. And that if you're interested in work and you're looking for work and you want to do more, kind of reaching out to everybody and anybody that you can to let them know that. And it might not be that they've got something immediately for you, but when eventually that comes up, you're in their mind as someone who's ready to go.
That's a great segue for what happened after the contracting freelancing and what happened next.
Well, so I was just getting kind of burned out, and it was just I didn't feel like I was kind of making progress, and decided that I really wanted to see what it would be like to do arts admin work full time and kind of put my eggs in that basket. So I applied to Aspen to be an orchestra manager for the summer. So there's a team of orchestra managers that come. There are 5 orchestras and 6 managers. One of the orchestras gets 2 managers. And each manager gets their own orchestra, which is a huge amount of responsibility. And you get to work with the faculty here and the guest artists. I mean, it was amazing. And it was the first time I had worked without playing also. And there were times where you feel a little sad. You're not, you know, playing Brahms 2 on stage with everyone, but not having to go through a placement audition. And
well, and also after you've just dealt with the stress of putting out, you know, 5 fires, walking on stage and playing Brahms 2 is also no mean feat.
Yeah, so I loved it. And then I applied for the Juilliard job, and it was at the same time that I was planning my wedding as well. And
backtrack. So you're at Aspen for the summer at your first, you know, full-time admin job. And how did you get from there to Juilliard?
So I asked for a meeting with the general manager of the time, and just said, you know,
Aspen general manager.
Yeah. Like before I go, I'm super interested in doing this full time. If you hear of anything or have any words of wisdom, you know, let me know. So I was driving home cross country from Colorado to Maryland.
Literally having just left the Aspen job where you just had this exit interview.
He said, are you interested in this Juilliard job? Just is open. And I was, and so interviewed for that in September. They offered it to me to start in October, 2 days after I got married, and I asked for just a week to go on the honeymoon, and that was okay.
For the general viewership, you know, both now and when this you know plays in archives, I should point out that in planning a wedding, Kate is very much like my own wife. It's not a wedding. It is a major production worthy of a full range Hollywood studio. I still remember when Robin was starting to plan our wedding, and she said, "So what should our wedding colors be?" And I literally did not understand the question. I did not know the answer. I didn't know the question.
Yeah.
What are wedding colors? What are you talking about? Robin had binders full of venues and service providers and so forth. And I think I saw similar binders for you.
Well, I made one. So Emil played in my wedding for the ceremony. And so I had string quartet binders and all of the things and, the emails of the itinerary. And
literally, I got, as much information playing for for Kate's wedding as I would get for playing, as a soloist with an orchestra. You arrive at this time. The first rehearsal is here. The time that we need you to, meet with the sponsors, have a press conference, whatever it is now. It was organized to the nth degree, and all that while you were prepping for your first year-round position at Juilliard.
Yeah. So I went up there. Oh, we got back from our honeymoon on a Saturday, and I was on the train on Sunday. So it was a crazy time. That was a crazy month.
But during the honeymoon, were you able to compartmentalize and say, okay, I'm not going to deal with this until I get back?
Yeah, we tried really hard to do that. And we didn't know what to expect too with the New York job. And I think that helped in a way, is that we just didn't know what we were getting into. So
we'll cross that bridge after Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. And my sister was already living in New York, so I was able to go stay with her for a little bit. So that was a nice way to transition and kind of a landing pad while I found an apartment and everything. But it was, I don't recommend it,
No, but and after being married, after taking on this job, I would again encourage students and parents to imagine, how often did you commute back and forth?
Either one of us was going back. We tried every other weekend. So either he would come to New York or I would go to DC.
Right.
Most of the time he was coming to New York though, because the job ended up being, it was a pretty 24/7 position with all the concerts that were going on and dealing with student issues and the rehearsal schedule. And so, so it was a lot, but he was able to come up more than I was able to go down.
And when you were finally saying, okay, I need to be in one place, right? Is that when you went back to Aspen? How did that happen?
Yeah, so the Aspen job came up. I guess I had been at Juilliard maybe a year and a half, and it just seemed like a really great opportunity. And it was a place that I had loved living. I mean, it's just gorgeous here in the summertime. And I knew that I was going to have the ability to have a little bit more of a work-life balance, because you've got the off season here. So that was appealing to me. And Wes was able to then consider a move too. So we both were super excited about the prospect of living here. So I moved here in March of 2018. So I became the director of operations then, and then Wes moved.
When?
A year later.
And effective, your new position begins effective this
Monday.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't want to, intrude the personal life into the professional one, but I should also congratulate you heartily on your first baby boy.
Oh, thanks.
I sympathize more than you can possibly imagine.
I know. I have nothing compared to.
Well, triplets are its own kind of category, but the one thing that I keep on telling former students that have now all grown up and gotten married, I don't feel it's really real until I'm looking at photos of their kids and I'm thinking, oh my God, time is just merciless.
Yeah.
So for that, I do not thank you at all.
That's right.
Right.
The circle of
just
life.
roll back the clock, 12 years or so.
I know. It's a long time.
Um,
Well, thanks.
tell them a little bit about the sort of the day-to-day job at Juilliard, because I'm also thinking in
Sure.
terms of the number of people who are thinking of Kirov Academy as, a stepping stone to a conservatory life.
Mm-hmm. So day to day in terms of my work, or day
I
to
think
day for
both.
the, okay.
Because like you said earlier, when we were talking, you said earlier that part of your job was putting yourself in the shoes of, at the festival, in the shoes of, okay, this is what a pianist coming to the festival will experience day to day. This is what a violinist will, and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that you saw the students' lives on a day to day basis,
Yeah.
but compare contrast with yours.
Sure. I mean, Juilliard is truly a special place. The level of excellence there is so high all the time. Everybody is just operating at such a high level. I mean, it's extraordinary to be a part of that. And it also creates a pressure cooker environment.
Say.
And so that was what I felt my job as personnel, I had to be really empathetic about, because these students were so driven and wanted to succeed so badly, and they were quite able to, they had all of the talent in the world, and it was just helping facilitate the practicalities of what it means to be in orchestra. So however I could be helpful with that, which is little things like being on time, but that also becomes a really big thing if it's not happening. And so also being able to spot student issues before they really kind of derail their semester. And if we were able to do that in orchestra, then we were, very happy to be a part of that. So the team, is two of us on personnel, me and my apprentice, and two for operations in terms of like setup and all the equipment required, and then two for library, and then we have our assistant dean. So we were all very zeroed in on kind of who our students were, and we were a close group because you spend a lot of time together. So the orchestra students would see us Mondays and Thursday mornings, but a student would only be required to be in at least 2 orchestra cycles per semester.
2 orchestra
cycles. So a cycle could be like 2 to 4 weeks long, where you work with a guest conductor and then perform a program, usually in Alice Tully Hall. So then they would have a little bit of time off from orchestra, and then they would come back to us for another cycle before closing out the semester. But then in the meantime, we have the lab orchestra there, which is the conductor's training lab, and students receive work study money to be a part of that group. And so a lot of them would be kind of our regulars, and they would come Friday mornings, and we would see them for lab orchestra. But they had to keep the office very updated with competitions that they were going to be a part of, auditions that they were going to go travel for, and we had to keep track of all of those dates for them, so that we would talk about, okay, you're not going to be available in April, so I'm not going to assign you to a cycle in April. I'm going to assign you to a cycle in February. But there was a lot of protocol about that and how to do that appropriately, and to make sure that both parties had enough time. So the students have a lot going on, and they are traveling a lot. And
tell them about like the average week for your average student.
Yeah, well, orchestra I'm talking about orchestra, but they've got rehearsals, they've got lessons, full class schedule. They're practicing, they're doing chamber music.
And for class schedule, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about classes like theory, classes like ear training, classes, and for those that are not musicians, especially for parents who are not musicians, I would, correct me if I'm wrong again, I would define ear training as like the equivalent of taste training for a chef.
Right.
You want to be able to identify what you're hearing, not just, oh, that's purdy,
Yeah.
So ear training, theory, orchestration. I don't know if that's still a class.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not totally sure what their requirements. Yeah, were, but I mean, it was a full docket, and then on top of that, all of the practice time and making sure that they're applying for different auditions and competitions and getting all of that together. And
one fellow competitor, I don't even remember at which competition this was, said something that about how her parents got her practicing by saying that, remember, when you're not practicing, your competitors are.
And that's definitely the sentiment, and kind of feeling that pressure, but they're also your peers and your colleagues, and you're living together and you're hanging out together, but you're also competing. So it gets complicated.
And for your week, how many rehearsals weekly did you have to oversee?
So we would have Monday, Thursday rehearsals for sure in the morning, and then Fridays for lab. And then sometimes we would have an extra rehearsal on a different day of the week. And we would have performances in the evening and weekends. But then whenever for
example, you are, it's a 24/7 job, like you said, to begin with, but performance days, I would imagine you are, never not on call.
Right, because you've got the dress rehearsal in the morning. You're making sure everybody's there and accounted for, going through announcements, like you got to leave the stage after this piece and come back on at this piece, and call times and all the things. And then you have a little break and then come back for the show, and making sure everybody's there for the concert and dressed appropriately. And
yeah, I love the story you told about socks.
Yeah. Because the ladies have to wear black socks for their concert attire, and concert attire was very strictly enforced.
Well, you don't want anything visually, standing out, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't wear too many ornaments in your hair, and the girls, the neckline has to be modest, and boys' ties have to be solid black. And so I slowly but surely developed, a sock bag and having extra ties.
Bag.
Yeah.
Like a mom, taking her kids on a play date, and just in case, making sure that they've got like a change of underwear.
Yeah. And I learned that from my predecessor there, who was like, you have to have the socks, so she showed me the way with that one. But
the amazing thing is, we're talking college students who have been told very clearly a very simple instruction: wear black socks.
That's right.
So what ends up happening? Invariably, someone doesn't wear black socks because that instruction obviously doesn't apply to them, I guess.
Right. Or they just didn't read it, They
didn't read it.
Yeah.
They didn't get the memo, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I want to hear any entertaining horror stories. Because I mean, like, as soon as you describe this, I'm remembering, the trip here with this orchestra, or the trip there with that pianist, and all the things that can and do go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty lucky that I haven't had anything catastrophic happen. But what's funny is when I have interviewed for these jobs, I get the scenario questions, which are
like, what would you do if?
But it's all the things happen at once, the flute players throwing up in the bathroom, the conductor's late, you don't have a snare drum, and the doors to the hall are locked. Which do you tackle first?
It's like one of these puzzles of, there's a fire in your house. What do you take out first? And
That's right.
See what kind of person you are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you answer for that?
Well, they want to see, it's like the answer itself isn't as important as the fact that you're not screaming at the question being asked. Yeah. Right. So, kind of going through the priority list of, well, could we do without the third flute, and
do I have a list of, possible flutists who, are on standby?
Who could take over? Yeah. So, yeah, you kind of have to be prepared for anything, because really anything can happen. So, but it's always a team effort. And I think that's what I learned at Juilliard too, is that you're not the only one that is
Because
out there.
in DC you were, right? In DC.
Yeah, and so it kind of felt like that was a learning curve for me, that you have to rely on your teammates, and bring them in, and learning how to communicate with them, and how to make them a part of the process.
Did you have a say in selecting those teammates?
No, just my apprentice.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But presumably the same people who hired you based on your facility with a certain skill set, would hire using the same metrics for the librarian position or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So everybody was so stellar there. Can't say enough about them. And same at Aspen. And I think that's such a great part of this position too, is that you get to work with so many different groups of people. You're working with other administrators, but you're also working with the faculty, and you're working with the students, and kind of looking at each group and what they bring to the table, and
do you
what
find
they
that
need.
Now, because you have seen the cogs and wheels of what makes a performance feasible versus a total disaster that people then remember for decades, do you find that, first of all, you appreciate performances more, or that you're more cognizant of, oh my, I hope this thing goes right now?
Yeah, you start to look at things much differently, and kind of thinking about like what a performer is going through backstage while you're sitting in the audience waiting for them to come out, and kind of thinking about what kind of energy is back there, and how much activity there is back there. Well, you're just like, what's taking so long?
Have you were you watching the Tchaikovsky competition, the most recent one?
No.
Okay, so you don't know the whole thing that happened with the Chinese pianist?
No.
Okay, so here is a little horror story to entertain you. The final round of the Tchaikovsky competition, the finalists have to play two pieces. I just remember what it was for violin. I think it's kind of the same thing for piano. In the case of the violin, it was two full concerti, and they're back to back. Right? I think you can leave the stage and come right back. You don't leave the stage, take a coffee break, come back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The pianist in question had as his repertoire the Rachmaninoff Rhapsody and a theme of Paganini. Mm-hmm. And I think Tchaikovsky's first. Everybody does the first piano concerto. And of course, the MC, the announcer, is saying stuff as he is walking onto the stage in Russian. So evidently, the announcement was the order of the program, which the pianist knew to be first Tchaikovsky, then Rachmaninoff. But evidently, the announcer just by mistake, by design, by sabotage, no one knows, announced it in reverse. The orchestra started in reverse.
Oh, no.
And for the non-musicians, I should point out that the Rhapsody and the theme of Paganini starts with da-da-da-da-dum, bum, boom, da-da-da-da-dum, bum. You don't have even a full measure to prepare for starting. Meanwhile, your brain is on a totally different piece. There is a priceless photograph of the pianist looking at the conductor just at the beginning of the Rachmaninoff, like.
Oh, nightmare scenario.
At least the jury were told, midway through the performance, after the performance, at some point, right then and there, the jury were told that there was a horrible mix-up. He was expecting to play it, opposite. And to their credit, the jury said, if he wishes, he can replay the final round.
Oh, that's fair.
Except to his understandable credit, he said, I just played two monster works. I'm not going to do this again. You just ran a marathon. What would you like to do next? Right? Yeah. So there, I would think that is very much a production manager behind the scenes epic fail.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be back there for something like that.
You wouldn't want to be answerable for something like that then.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yikes.
So do you have any instances where, like, the thing that you never thought you needed to look out for? I mean, the sock bag is a great example from early in your career, but does it still happen that you're like, I never knew that you could derail a thing in this epic fashion?
I think when I was an orchestra manager here for the summer, I had a lot of those moments, but because I'm not the man on the ground anymore in the orchestra rehearsals, I feel like
It
the
gets
potential.
filtered. It'll get buffered before it gets to you.
Yeah. So now my job is to prepare the orchestra managers for all of those things that can happen. I mean, the summer I was here, I had a kind of a disaster with sectionals one morning. We had our orchestra would split into violin 1, violin 2, viola, whatever. And we had an issue with one of the students and one of the teachers that was teaching a sectional. And I would make rounds in the morning and I would just check in on each one. And then the conductor would follow me and kind of do them on a delayed basis. So there was just this like comedy of errors of me, taking the student and the teacher to mediate with them while trying to keep the conductor from coming to the room so that he didn't know, so we could keep that, and it's just then taking the student out and just talking to them and then putting her back and then bringing this teacher out and talking to her and putting her back. And then, the conductor's coming, but he needs a cigarette, let's just get him.
Have to, right. It's Mideast process negotiations.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just talking to people and kind of looking at where they're coming from. But at the same time, at a certain point, there are boundaries and expectations that haven't been met, and you got to have tough conversations, or at least be willing to have the tough conversations and kind of meet it head on. And there were a couple times my summer there too, where we had some students who just weren't really used to having so many rules, and maybe they were coming from more of a loosey-goosey youth orchestra experience, which is totally fine, and Aspen, we have so many moving parts that we've got to start on time and we've got to follow protocol, and there's a procedure, and we really try to train our students to follow that so that they are prepared for the next step. And so everyone's coming to Aspen at maybe a different level of understanding of what that looks like. And so giving them the benefit of the doubt at first, and then giving here are the expectations, and giving them a couple chances.
Yeah. How many times can you fail to understand that, you're expected to do this or that?
Exactly. And we're not a school in a way that we can give grades and that we can, hold that over their heads. So it's kind of more of a, we're doing this for the good of the group.
But I'm assuming also that, people come to Aspen year after year. So someone who had a stellar audition, one year and then had a poor experience in person, their audition the next year is going to be filtered through that poor experience.
Well, and we can ask people to go home if we have to, but I would say, and I learned this in the freelancing world, in that it's really small community, and classical music is everybody knows everybody through 1 or 2 degrees. And so it's important to think about that when you're behaving in orchestra or interacting with people, and just to know that the person that you're interacting with probably knows this person down the line who you're going to meet with later, maybe, and to have set yourself up for success for that is important. So
yeah, I remember having a little bit of a crash course in this when I was 12. My mother was playing concerts in South Africa, and I was with her, and a bunch of different, newspapers and radio channels and so forth. We're just, I guess, charmed by the whole human interest side of the violinist and her son, the single parent and her son. So there were, some articles that were interviews with me. It was my first experience being interviewed by newspapers. And I was not circumspect about some things that I said. So I remember about 6 months after this tour going to a concert that Yehudi Menuhin was playing, and being terrified because in one of those articles I had said something unflattering about Menuhin. So in my 12-year-old mind, it was like, Menuhin will have this article placed in front of him when I meet him. And like, of course he didn't know who I was from Adam.
right.
But all of a sudden it occurred to me that, the chain of connection between even this little podunk me and, this great person there's one degree of separation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously no one's going to put a newspaper article in front of him, but what if just by chance he happened to open that newspaper that day? Or more likely, if you played a concert, you were a royal pain, and then that person who hired you to play that concert is talking to the person you're trying to get you to hire you to play the next concert.
Right.
So yeah, the I don't want to use the word incestuousness because it's not. I don't want it to seem corrupt to people.
Right.
I want it to seem very much a closed circle.
Well, and it's a community that we're making art, which is different than kind of a business arrangement. It's just by the sheer nature feels more personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and I think that spreads out to the relationships involved, and it's hard to not have them feel significant. And it's just a way to honor that, right? And by treating everybody respectfully.
You're not saying, be a Machiavellian sort of, master manipulator of people. You're saying treat people decently. For you don't know who you're going to be dealing with again.
Yeah. And it's just a nice feeling when you meet someone years later, like, oh, well, I carried myself well 10 years ago.
Right. Right. You never have to blush for shame.
That's right. It's just extra security, and I think sets you up for success. But I think it's something that my generation, not growing up even with Facebook and Instagram until we were in college, didn't even really think about. But I feel like in some ways kids are more sensitive to that now because of what they're sharing online and knowing that it lives forever. And
that part I don't think has sunk in yet, just by virtue of being, 12 years old, and permanence is not something that you really understand yet. You understand the reach, perhaps, of social media.
Yeah.
But not necessarily the permanence of it. And I think what kids are learning now is the real world consequences.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing that can happen to you is not that you get a bunch of likes or that you get a bunch of flames or whatever. There are worse things.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think we all grow up in this industry together too. So that's what's challenging too, is that you're meeting people when you're playing and working together when you're 18, and then you're still working and playing with those people when you're 40, 50, 60. So this is, it's a lifelong industry.
I would definitely stress that point. The people that you are working with in a field that's already limited by nature of being so selective and so specialized, those people, their identity is, as your identity is, that of a musician.
Right. And so it's just keeping that in mind. That's all,
I wanted to also pick your brain a little bit about both Juilliard and Aspen. The big question that parents always have, that students always have: what should I know when preparing to audition, when preparing to apply? Do you have like a handy do's and don'ts?
I think it's always helpful to reach out to a current teacher
at the institution.
Yeah, to get their take on things. And both places are so competitive that what I've learned is, and this is what I was always nervous about doing, is playing in front of people before these auditions, but I think the more that you can break that seal and go over it a million times in front of people and making whoever that is, it might be the teacher that's there or you or any other various opinions, to just kind of get used to that feeling of being super nervous. But I think you also need to be prepared for what's going to happen if you do get in. And is that something that you really want? It's one thing to get it, but it's another thing to really live it once you're there. And is that something
when the dog chasing the car catches the car, what does he do with the car?
Exactly. And is that something that you really want, and like, do you really want to be in a place where it's so much pressure? And maybe it is, and that's great. But maybe it's not. And I think what I've learned from this too is that it's okay to change your mind too. And that It's no reflection on the fact that you made a bad choice. You made a choice with the information you had at hand, and now you're making a different choice, and that's okay.
Yeah, the changing of your mind is sometimes not possible. You cannot make the right choice. You didn't have possession of all the information beforehand.
Yeah.
The kind of stress that the profession involves, because everything is, of course, aimed at this one moment in time that is the live performance, where so many different things have to go right that you've been trying over and over, but maybe you failed to rehearse the right thing, or maybe there is some sort of production catastrophe. I remember going to a recital that Roger Tapping from the Takacs Quartet, a recital that he gave at the French embassy here in DC, and I don't know who was responsible for this, but the air conditioning was making not just a noise like air conditioning. It sounded like somebody was playing a bass drum in the hall. It wasn't subtle. It was like at times drowning him out. Who could have known? I mean, did they have this problem in rehearsal? Was there a rehearsal? Was there a full hour that he had in the room? But at that moment in time, somebody somewhere was sweating bullets and catching flack.
Yeah.
And that's the both I think fun and exhausting part of this job.
Yeah, it's that moment that you can't get back.
Yeah, and that you are certain you've prepared for, only to find out that no, you didn't.
Yeah.
In these kind of playing for people in these kind of preparatory auditions, one of the earlier podcasts I talked to Andrew Havron, who is now the concertmaster of the Sydney Symphony, and he was very emphatic and even specific about, look, people feel like they can't approach the musician, the professor. They'll see us in a cafe and they'll steer clear. We don't mind. It's okay. You can write to the professor at Aspen and say, do you mind if I play for you? It's not that you are trying to bypass the system. That is the system.
Well, and I think it goes for, anyone that's interested in more of the admin side too. And we tell our summer staff when they come, ask the CEO for an informational interview, ask the general manager, ask the artistic advisor. The worst they're going to say is, no, I don't have time. But the best they'll say is, absolutely, I would love to sit down and talk to you for half an hour. And who knows what little nugget you're going to get out of that could really help with your future. And it keeps you kind of fresh in their mind and lets you kind of voice what you're interested in. And if something ever comes up like, oh yeah, I remember that she was really into that, this position is open, I'm going to float it her way.
From the perspective of the person doing the hiring, from the perspective of the person doing the applying, there's also understanding that, the way that they are choosing people at Aspen is this, which does not fit me. The way they're choosing people at Juilliard is that, which does fit me. The way that I'm going to audition for Sydney Symphony is going to be like this because they happen to like their Mozart like this. The way I'm going to audition for New York Phil is going to be, like that because they like their Mozart like that.
Totally. Yeah.
But there's also something that you said and that Wes has said that I think people need to hear. Ask for people's opinions. Ask for people's advice.
People love giving advice.
Amen.
Look at me eating it up right now.
I didn't want to say. But yeah, no. First of all, people love it, I'm sure, because there's an ego element. But it is a pleasure to have learned something, I think. And part of that pleasure is being able to share what you have learned, to process things, I guess. That's
right. And so that it feels like your struggles can help someone else, because we all have to learn something the hard way. There's no way around it, but if you can impart a little bit to someone to help, then it makes all the difference, and even we were talking about this morning, but just how you really encouraged me, that my interest in this is maybe not something that everyone has, and that's worth looking at, and that was because of the relationship that we had, which was teacher-student. And asking for your advice and all of that. And, and it plays a part.
I think there is a corresponding aspect. In other words, in your case, it was, well, Kate, do you realize just how extraordinary your organizational abilities are, how unusual they are? For somebody else, it might be, look, I realize that you are an absolutely marvelous player, but you are sort of self-effacing. You're not gonna go and ask people to play for them or conductors to audition for them. Maybe a solo life is more stressful than you want to deal with. Maybe you want to, work with a chamber group where that stress is at least, shouldered by 3 or 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else, maybe you don't want the uncertainty, the excitement of what comes tomorrow is not exciting to you, but nerve-wracking. Maybe you want the certainty of a paycheck, in which case, maybe the orchestra route is more suited to your personality. It's not just your playing, it's also your personality.
Yeah, that's right.
I would want people in talking to you, I would want people to have as a takeaway that there is self-discovery involved in choosing your particular, ultra specific path,
Mm-hmm.
combining, as you do, teaching with playing, with administrating, in somebody else's case, steering as far clear of administration as possible, because the thought gives them hives.
Yeah.
The thought gives them hives, but teaching for 20 hours a day, they eat that up. If anyone, were to take something away, one thing away from having you here as a guest today, that is where I would point them. Discover your superpower. Yeah.
And it takes time, and it can be kind of scary too, because I had set out on this path to be a violinist. That was what I went to grad school for.
I have to say, you still are a violinist. You don't stop being a violinist.
That's right. Professionally, to earn my keep as a violinist, and that transition to saying, you know what, this isn't really checking all of my boxes right now, and let's look at how I can pivot a little bit, because you do mourn a little bit of what that life would have been, but then it does, for me, things started to become so much easier. It felt like I was just pushing the rope a little bit.
You weren't swimming against the tide, right?
Yeah, and it didn't feel right. It was what I had said I always wanted to do, but that needed to be reevaluated. So once I made the change and decided that this is what I wanted to do, I was like, oh, this feels much better.
there's the, going with, going with the natural lie of the fur, going with the current. There's the satisfaction of being really good at something.
Yeah.
There's the financial remuneration,
Yeah.
because somebody who is looking for, I don't know, let's say a higher paycheck than perhaps a freelance lifestyle would offer, would want to be looking at a permanent position. Somebody who, for whatever reason, is not as concerned about money, maybe they enjoy the novelty of every day, the avoidance of routine.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want to leave some time for people to have questions, if they have any questions. I just saw, from Hannah Chitsas, another former student. What advice can you give young musicians to avoid burnout?
I think balance is super key, but it's also perspective, in that it is music. It's not brain surgery. And so that gives us some leeway to enjoy ourselves without killing someone on the table,
Well, in your case, for example, English Lit, right?
Yeah.
Do you find that you still resort to literature as a sort of piece of who you are, of your identity?
Yeah, and that's just something that I enjoy doing. But I found that the way that I've transitioned, like the percentages of my life of playing, you know, like playing was 90% and now it's like 15%, but that I enjoy it more at the 15%. And that's how I kept it alive, you know, and without quitting altogether. And that there's a middle ground there. And I think the burnout comes when it's like, it's 100% all the time. And if I don't do it 100%, then what's the point of doing it at all? And that there is a way to adjust that as you go, and being kind of generous with yourself,
to yourself,
yeah, to give yourself the permission to do that.
I think, yeah, the percentages are not, you know, you must have this proportion of recreation to that proportion of work to that proportion of the work being, you know, performing versus teaching versus administrating. It's discovering your own levels, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of what makes you happy.
Somebody that will get burnt out by having to do, you know, 20% playing, needs to know that that's burning them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also the not learning to not compare yourself to other people all the time. I think that leads to burnout too. Like, this person is at this place and I'm at this place and I need to work really hard to get to where they are. It's just knowing that they're an apple and you're an orange, and you can't compare.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Do we have any others? We have comments. I don't see any other questions in the comments. So what I would wrap by saying, first and foremost, of course, what I would wrap by saying is congratulations. Welcome to motherhood.
Thank
Life
you.
as you knew it is over.
It really is.
And what I would congratulate you on is not the fact of the promotion, but the discovery of the path. The way that you have invented yourself and I wouldn't say reinvented, but tweaked that invention of yourself since I first met you is really a pleasure and a satisfaction to see.
Oh, well, thank you, Emil. It means a lot.
Thank you. I hope that everyone will join us also next week. These podcasts will now be at this time regularly at 3:00. My guest next week will be announced shortly, but I can give everyone a little spoiler alert. My guest next week will be Professor Irina Morisanu of the University of Maryland, multiple competition winner and laureate, and an all-round fabulous violinist. And we'll be talking a little bit more about the whole competition circuit and the college application circuit. And my guests after that, well, you'll just have to stay tuned. Thanks, everyone, and see you around on the next time.
Thank you.